Hey, what's up guys, Ackland here, of course. Welcome back to each and every one of you. This video might be a new one for a lot of you. Maybe some of you have never seen me before. My background is a lot in MMOs. I've had a WoW channel for maybe the last 7 or 8 years. And I've been sort of hyper-focused on MMOs for a very, very long time. I like MMOs, although they've increasingly started to fall down my list of games that I look forward to playing. But I've had an interesting sort of few days to think about MMOs and what is happening within the MMO space. Increasingly, we see gamers sort of becoming disillusioned with the MMO space. We saw it first with Final Fantasy Dawntrail. Final Fantasy came from a mega high and it almost fell flat on its face. People were just not excited or happy about the expansion. And then with World of Warcraft, we see a similar thing happening in the War Within, and it's a trend that seems to be repeating itself almost now every single expansion, where the expansion launches, and for the first few weeks, people are hyped about the expansion, but then as time goes on, people become more and more disillusioned with the game, and fewer people play. We now have a problem with where a lot of Mythic Plus players are about to give up or have already given up. We have people who don't really enjoy the raiding, people who don't really enjoy the delves and the open world stuff. And I kept thinking to myself, well, why is this happening? What is the reason that is behind this? Is it just a case of the games being bad right now, or the games not being designed very well? Because I still enjoy my time in World of Warcraft, to be quite frank and honest with you. But it is an interesting thought experiment. It's interesting to ask what could potentially be happening here. And I don't want to hear the whole, well, MMOs are just dying. That is just objectively not true. You look at Throne and Liberty, for example. This game had 300,000 all-time peak players on launch day. And in the last 24 hours, it still had 139,000 players playing it. Lost Ark still has a not super healthy player base, but it still has a player base of about 21,000, and it had 1.3 million all-time peak at the launch. These launch numbers tell me that clearly gamers want MMOs. The fact that these games are still hyped and still do really well on launch day suggests that gamers genuinely are hyped for MMOs, and yet, as soon as the MMOs come out, there's almost this disillusionment train that just, you know, while the guy is sitting there playing, suddenly this train just hits him and like, whoa, wait, what am I doing? Why am I playing this? I need to go. I don't like any of this. And then they just log out. And the question is why? Why does this continuously happen? Now, I'm not going to sit here and speculate on, oh, it's just because the developers are really bad and they don't know what they're doing. I don't think that's the case. I think the problem is actually a little bit of a lot of things. The first big one, in my opinion, is technological advancement. You see, way back in the day, if we just go back 10 years ago, MMOs had something that no other game had: community. No other game could really boast that community. There were multiplayer games, and you could play multiplayer games with your friends, but almost increasingly, or almost entirely, you could only play with people that you already knew. It was incredibly difficult to play with other people that you may not have known. And while games like League of Legends and Dota have had friends lists for a long time, so if you're playing with someone, you can invite them to your friends list, this would still limit them to only really existing within the client of that game, and you can only play together when they were also online. I believe the biggest death knell for MMOs in the technological space was Discord and also internet speeds. You see, Discord came about, and suddenly that guy that you had on your friends list in League of Legends that you sometimes play with, you could now invite him to an actual Discord server. And there you guys could talk, you could chat, you could hang out in voice, and you could actually set up game sessions where you can play together. It made every game almost a multiplayer game. Even single player games can now be played with other people that also enjoy those games. And multiplayer games have become, almost every single game now has an official Discord server, and sometimes some of these games have multiple unofficial Discord servers where you can go and find other people to play with and do the things that you enjoy. So in many ways, the advantage that MMOs had, where this is the only place where you could find that large community to do content with disappeared. And it was replaced by Discord, which now allows everyone to basically play games in exactly that way. Now, what I think that did was reveal one of the more fundamental flaws within the MMO design space. You see, MMOs are jacks of all trades, yet masters of none. And they have to be this by their very nature. Because an MMO is so expensive to develop, and it really is a lot more expensive than most modern day games, the issue that MMOs often run into is if you only make an MMO for a very targeted number of people, that's not going to be enough for you to actually turn a profit. So what you want is to cast as wide a net as is humanly possible, get as many potential players into your game as is humanly possible, and then go from there. This means that if you are a fully matured MMO, you're going to have raids, you're going to have dungeons, you're going to have some kind of open world system, some kind of story system, some kind of quest system, some kind of collectible system. The issue is that none of those systems will be the best in the business. They'll be serviceable, and some of them might actually be good. World of Warcraft, for example, I still believe have good dungeons and good raids. But if we broke down what a raid is a puzzle. It's a boss that you fight, and you have to figure out how to fight that boss. If you were to start comparing World of Warcraft raiding or raid bosses to games like Elden Ring leaves World of Warcraft in the dust. Compare it to something like Monster Hunter, it leaves it in the dust. The problem is that MMOs can never really be brilliant in any one of the elements that they try to attack. They can only ever be decent at it. And they can maybe be good, but they can never be brilliant. And it's a question of resources. If you're going to hyper-specialize on one element of your game, you're by definition going to neglect a bunch of the other things in your game. For years, Final Fantasy prioritized story. As a result, dungeons weren't necessarily as good. Raids were decent, but not all that amazing. It was really the ultimates that it had as its standout feature. World of Warcraft, on the other hand, neglected story and instead replaced it with more lore rather than narrative-based, because lore is easier. The department can handle that, and you don't really need to bog down your other resources, which then enables you to spend your resources on dungeon and raid design. But increasingly, we see that expansions will either have great raids, maybe decent dungeons and very bad PvP, or very good PvP, decent dungeons and bad raids. But it's very rare that you get an expansion that has all three of the big ones be brilliant. And again, it is a question of resources, because it's not just about who can design a dungeon. It's also about the artists, the musicians, the voice actors. There's so much resources that go into the development of a single asset within the game that you can't do everything equally well. And the problem is, with so many indie developers now stepping onto the plate with things like Unreal Engine and Unity, and even more engines coming out, it's become easier and easier for games to actually challenge the existing sort of approach of MMOs. And instead of trying to be an MMO, it can hyper focus on the things that it wants to do well. Monster Hunter, for example, takes the idea of world bosses and raid bosses in World of Warcraft, and it hyper specializes on that. You want to kill bosses and follow tactics and get them down? Yeah, we got you, fam. You can just do that. You want to just endlessly, mindlessly farm bosses without having to care about a bunch of quests and a bunch of storylines that you couldn't care less about? Yeah, we got you, fam. There's another game that's coming out soon that I think may actually, in principle at least, be a good idea. It's a game called Fellowship. And what Fellowship does is, it takes the dungeons of World of Warcraft and the Mythic Plus system of World of Warcraft, and it removes all of the other noise. Open world, gone. The idea of stories and quests, gone. Raids, gone. PvP, gone. Dungeons and raids, front and center. And if you look at the game, it's not an ugly looking game, right? Not at all. I'll just quickly show you guys this. You look at the graphics of this game, and you actually see that it looks decent. It looks like it plays decent, and this is genuinely it. You literally log into the game, And there's your map. You click on it, you go into a dungeon. As you complete it, you get gear and upgrades, and this allows you to change your builds, change the way that you want to do things. And one of the key things for me in games like this is the fact that, unlike World of Warcraft, where you have to keep in mind that if you make changes to abilities on this end, it might impact a bunch of other things within your game, here you can do whatever you want, because you only have this one element that you have to worry about. The other thing, of course, is for players that genuinely just enjoy doing sort of dungeons and raids within World of Warcraft, this means that they can now, you have a couple of hours free. Yeah, just go run a couple of dungeons. You don't have to worry about logging in, and maybe you have to do a bunch of world quests, and maybe you have to do a bunch of this. You just log in and you do this, and it takes care of the whole problem. And it sort of makes me think, okay, what happens now to MMOs in the future? How do MMOs compete against this? Because this is a problem, and it is going to become a bigger problem. I'm not suggesting Fellowship will be the one that actually is the chosen one, but games like Fellowship. What happens when another company comes out and they actually have these 20-man raids, and that's all you have to do? What happens if Fellowship is the one that builds raids for 10 people at a time? Does it start to impact the choice that players have? Because by its very nature, an MMO is a second life. By its very nature, MMOs require a lot of time investment. And oftentimes, especially in the real world, in the modern world, time is the one commodity that very few people have in spades. They have limited amounts of it. And when you start to offer people the ability to go into a dungeon, and that's the only thing they have to do, and it also happens to be the only thing they like in World of Warcraft, maybe that is something that draws them towards that. And instead of playing WoW, they can just log into Fellowship, because it's a better experience. What happens when companies start to build collecting games, where you can collect armors and you can collect pets and mounts? You have a game like that already called Palia. So here you have Palia, for example. This is a game that has very little combat, no PvP, no dungeons or anything like that. You can hunt, and that's where really the only combat that you'll ever get involved in. But the whole point of this game is to build and farm and collect stuff. From pets to outfits to girlfriends and husbands and wives and all the rest of it. That's literally what this game is about. Just collect some stuff and go. So clearly, this game is already taking care of that element of WoW. You see, in my estimation, now Palia is kind of like an MMO, but because you don't have dungeons, because you don't have raids, you don't have to worry about that. You are hyper-specialized. In my estimation, that is a real problem for the gaming industry, and one that I'm not entirely sure they know how to solve. You see, my prediction is that in the future, what we're going to get is more hyper-specialized video games. And I think that it's really the only way that video games can survive, is by becoming hyper-specialized. Well, not video games, but MMOs. They have to become specialized, because the market demands it. Very soon, MMOs are going to lose all of what remains advantages that it had in the many people online community sense, as more and more games become focused on that social aspect. And then it's going to be stuck in a world where it cannot compete on offering everything to everyone, and instead it will have to offer something for someone. That at least is my thoughts, and I realize that this goes against everything I've been saying for the last 2 years. And that's why I was so surprised when I started to think about this and started to look into this, looking at the numbers and looking at the amount of people that I see complain, and just realizing that maybe the time for MMOs truly, or at least traditional MMOs as we know them, is done. And for those of you that think, nah, it will never happen, Aquilon, don't worry about that. That's what they thought about EverQuest, and what they thought about Dark Age of Camelot, and they thought that about Lineage 2. See, these were games that were set in their ways. They were super hardcore. You would lose levels and XP whenever you died. You could lose all of your gear in a single death. They were punishing, they were brutal, and people thought this is how MMOs are supposed to work. World of Warcraft came around and said, no, we don't, like, you can be a lot more casual and people can still enjoy it. And those games died very quickly after. I hope that it doesn't happen in the same way. I hope that WoW doesn't die. I hope that WoW picks a path and goes down that path and see how that path works. And it doesn't mean that you don't have to offer other things in the game as well. You maybe just stop specializing in those things. However, history sort of proves that it's usually not the existing franchises that survive it or that makes the change, but the ones that come after that sort of kill them. I hope that that doesn't happen. But fundamentally, we will have to wait and see. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. Remember, you can support me over on Patreon if you have not already. It's just, you know, in the link in the description down below, you get early access to all of the videos that I make. You can ask me any questions you want, and I will always be happy to answer, and sometimes make videos based on your thoughts and your ideas. As always, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and I'll see all of you in the next one. Peace!